Hello and welcome to this Liberland Anniversary Conference. I am Ptacnik, the Minister of Justice of Liberland, and I'm going to talk to you about the Ministry of Justice and what it does for you. First, an explanation of why I am not present with you physically. At the time you're seeing this, I either have become or am very soon to become a father. The President of Liberland has allowed me to stay here and support my family. However, I am with you in thoughts, and I hope this will be an informative presentation, although remote. So what are we doing? There are many activities the Ministry of Justice is engaged in. We will describe 4. Drafting of the Constitution and legislation to make sure that we have a legal system. Supporting the settlement, making sure that it becomes a self-sufficient, independent community in the heart of Liberland's polity. Designing and building the judiciary, promising to become a new way how to adjudicate disputes with unparalleled efficiency and speed, and supporting other parts of the government, making sure their activities are legal and efficient. First, let us start with the Constitution. As you may know, Liberland already has a basic law. This basic law is called the Articles of the Provisional Government, and it has served us well. However, in this new phase of the country, with the settlement present, it shows its limits. And as we can read in the articles themselves, they are not meant to stay forever. They're great for founding, not so great for thriving. Why? There are certain issues with these articles. They are very short, and there is not much said there. The main principle of ruling Liberland is natural justice, which may sound attractive, but what is natural justice? Philosophers have been debating what natural justice is for many years. We define it as that which the Liberlanders find just in general and which is found just in other countries comparable to Liberland, if there are any. But this derivation is reaching the limits of its usefulness. A second issue which I would like to highlight is the unity of powers. In most countries, powers are divided. The articles allow for the unity of powers, meaning that a judge can be a minister, a legislator can be a minister, and so on. This works, but will likely raise many eyebrows in the international community once recognition is being realistically considered. And therefore, the articles propose their own disbandment after the general election. But we're talking about removing the articles and therefore also the provisional government. There has to be something to replace them. And that something needs to be codified somewhere. And the articles say it will be codified in a constitution. Liberland will have a written constitution, and we're writing it. What is this constitution all about? It starts and is centered around certain basic core principles which make Liberland the world's first libertarian country. The basic principle is self-ownership. That means that you own yourself, and you're responsible for your actions. If you mix your labor with something in the world, it becomes yours. The basic rule for interpersonal conduct is called non-aggression principle, and it's nothing more and nothing less than the owner has full control over whatever their property is and will not be infringed in their enjoyment of it. Meaning that if you try to do something, anything, with something that others own, it's your wrong, and the owner will be able to retaliate against you, to restore his ownership, and to gain restitution for whatever damage you caused. This is the basic rule of conduct of Liberland. Collective retaliation is also possible. To not allow that would encourage banditry. Now, and what happens if there is no collective to protect it for them? This is where the new Liberland government comes in. The Liberland government from now on will be the public protector of property. It will be the protector of property, the defender of last resort. Now, how is it going to work? In the ideal world, the government would be very simple. It would be composed of the Supreme Court and a number of courts under it. And there would be no laws. There would be only the non-aggression principle. And if somebody feels infringed, or if there is a conflict about what is owned by whom, this would go before the judiciary. And the judiciary would then set forth judgments which would be codified as precedents, and thereby organically the law of Liberland would be formed. However, the international community would not like this, because they expect countries to work in a certain way, states to have powers, for instance, legislative power, executive power, besides the judiciary. It also expects that the constitution will enumerate rights and freedoms, and not just leave everything for derivation by the judiciary. And so our constitution has all that. Besides the standard powers, judiciary, legislature, and executive, we have also a fourth power, the power of oversight, which works a lot like corporate board and is comprised of those who have given the most help to Liberland when it most needed it. As we can see, Liberland mixes the best of republicanism and, as we will soon learn, in particular Swiss type of republicanism, with corporate governance. And this is the way how the government will now operate after the constitution is in effect. The constitution is directly applicable, it gives you rights, and it allows you to seek recourse directly against any infringement, be it from your fellow Liberlander, from someone else, or from the government. Next to the constitution we have laws. We're drafting the basic set of laws, no more and no less. We don't want any frenetic legislative activity, but as we are expected to have laws, and as it is prudent to set forth some principles, we are drafting the basic laws of Liberland, no more and no less. This is everything you need to know to understand what it means to be a Liberlander and what your powers are over the government to protect yourself from a potential government overreach. Interesting, law in Liberland is here to protect your freedom and not to curtail it. We will have a citizenship law telling you what citizenship means and what rights and obligations you have. Referendum law, which in the spirit of Swiss republicanism gives all citizens the power to legislate. Judicial process law that sets forth the principles on which the most important power of the government operate. Now we're going to describe how we draft laws. The Ministry of Justice and another ministry prepare a draft for the cabinet initial review. The cabinet gives its recommendations, and then the government will. That means the international representatives, for example, advisors, and so on. After that comes the public review. The laws will be given to you. And after each stage, the cabinet will accept or reject the recommendations. In this way, the laws are truly made in conjunction with the public. This is where it ends currently. After the public review, the law will be in place. When the new constitution takes effect, the Congress will have the power to re-examine all the laws which have been adopted. And the new laws which are proposed after that will first require Congress approval and then go to the referendum, to you. So, which laws do we have? We start with the citizenship law that defines what it means to be a citizen, that gives you citizenship rights. It tells you how to acquire citizenship. You can acquire it by investment, but also by birth. Your children will become Liberland nationals. That means citizens without political power, but they have a special rule that they can start sparing for political power and they can influence politics from the day one, albeit probably with less merits unless they inherit a lot. That's up to you, of course. So this status of citizen without political power is called Liberland national, and they have passports, they have all the protection, just that they wouldn't have the full political power, which is defined at 5,000 politically pooled Liberland merits on the blockchain. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please listen to the blockchain presentation unless it came before me, then you know, and you'll learn all about it. It also tells us how to sanction a citizen, and the sanction is in the loss of merit, and therefore the loss of political power. And if you have less than 5,000 merits, you cannot join the referendum, and if you have less than 0 merits, you will be on a public blacklist. The most extreme violators of Liberland law will be liable for the removal of citizenship, but this is a very extreme provision, requires the cooperation of all governmental powers. Next, we have the referendum law. So how do you decide in Liberland? There are two forms of referendum. A positive referendum, which instates something. So it makes a law, it makes a regulation, it makes a decision. You can decide on everything in Liberland by referendum. It doesn't only need to be a law, and it will have the force of law. Then there is the negative referendum, which exists solely to remove those things which you enact in a positive referendum. They both are very different. The positive referendum is voting with your Liberland merits. There is a referendum period in which the referendum runs. It can be shortened. Then there is an enactment period in which the country prepares itself for the new law. There is Congress and Senate oversight to make sure that malicious proposals which are not high quality enough, will get rejected, will not get into the referendum without being reworked. The negative referendum doesn't vote with LLM. It is formally less complex. So the Congress and Senate oversight is minimal there, although it's present. And again, it can only be used to dismiss an official or to veto a provision. And that's the most common use case. And once you start it, it will run forever until 50% plus one of all citizens, not just voters, all citizens, will say repeal. And then the law or regulation will get repealed. Next, we have the border law. The border law ensures that we have a normalized border regime, that the borders get delimited and demarked so that we know where they are and we show where they are in the physical world, like with signs and something like that. It defines border crossings, border crossing points, limitations of rights are along those border crossing points. That's unfortunately necessary. The ibis, it's not just a bird. There are lots of birds in Liberland, so we named after the ibis the Immigration and Border Integrity Service, IBIS, which is the border police of Liberland. The law also defines how to reside if you're not a citizen in the country, and how to visit it with a visa. We have only one visa. We don't have student visa and work visa, and it's very important that you can work even on your 3-day visit. There is no work permits in Liberland. You can do that. It's your law. There is no work permit in Liberland. Working is your right. We have special regime for certain individuals, small children, refugees, and Croatians. Croatians can reside in Liberland automatically. They can enter and exit automatically. It's for them, it's like Schengen. And they can also own property in Liberland. They will be very close to citizens. They just won't have political powers and won't have passports, but they can enter, exit at will. And this is to welcome them and to make sure that they understand that we're here to open the area for them and definitely not to close it. The judicial process law. This law defines how the judiciary works, and it sets up something called a general process, which is very important. In your countries, you have multiple processes. You have administrative processes of special kinds, misdemeanor process, criminal law process, and they're independent of each other. In Liberland, this is not the case. Here we have the general judicial process, which is a simplified process you are familiar of from your country. And then everything else that any branch of the government does, even the executive, just derives from it. So we have the precedential system, and precedents which apply to the judicial process will also apply to administrative process. Now, if you don't know what this is about, then this may be confusing, but it's very important to make sure that you have rights, that your rights are really upheld all across the board. And it makes sure that the experience of interacting with our government is totally different than of your government. It's faster, it's simpler, it's logical. So how's the process working? So it begins with a written process, and we hope that it also ends there. Written process is simple. It's just in writing. It's you write to the court, you write to the other party through the court. It's all through the court. The court has to be informed of everything. The court is the master of the process, and this written process is the cheapest. So for court costs, right? In Liberland we have no taxes, no mandatory taxes, and therefore everything in the judiciary is financed by the parties. So it is the interest of everybody that court process is fast and efficient and also cheap. Now, if the written process doesn't solve a case, it goes before the mediator, unless the parties reject it. And then the mediator is somebody who tries to bring them together, have them talk, and try to find some solution. But if that doesn't work, there's a trial, which is by purpose designed to be very similar to what you understand about a trial. Although the power of the judge is very great, the judges can decide how the trial is going to work way more freely than in your country, which is to say that we trust the judge a lot. And for instance, there is this principle of absolute material truth, which means that anything that the judge sees within the trial can be evidence, and it will be only up to the judge to decide whether it is admissible in the sense that it's trustworthy. So it's like the court's supposed to be something like a scientific laboratory, and you're like an environment set to find the truth, right? And we have the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is the supreme instance of appeal. A verdict, of course, you will have a power to appeal against it. You go to a higher court, but ultimately the highest instance is the Supreme Court, which, just like in America, has the power to select cases, interesting cases, cases which are necessary to resolve in the name of freedom. Now, this was our legislative activity, and we go now to the settlement support. Why is this even needed? Well, the Croatian authorities, Croatian border police, and certain other institutions like Croatian forestry sometimes misunderstand our intentions and the purpose of our activities, which are to make sure that this area becomes rich and that there is this unique hub of international commerce, of freedom, of entrepreneurship, and that everybody gets a job. Like, this is what we're literally doing. But they see it differently sometimes. And so they act against us. And they assume that Liberland is under their jurisdiction, which it isn't. And therefore there are about 50 misdemeanors, which were misdemeanor charges, which were issued against us. And we have objected them all, because we don't believe that they have jurisdiction in Liberland, and they don't. And there are other cases. People have been expelled, and those expulsions happen on spurious grounds. Access has been limited, for example, from the river, and boats are very efficient to get supplies, so we're trying to work with that. There were instances of enforced demolition. This, I call it here the šume problem, because it's usually done by the Croatian forestry, the Hrvatske šume, and we're trying to find an amicable solution to that. Of course, everything we do, we are coordinating with Croatian attorneys, so there is expert support, and we're doing this efficiently and as fast as the Croatian system of judiciary allows, which isn't that fast, unfortunately, and so we're trying to change that, at least within Liberland. We're creating a new judiciary. This is the third activity. This judiciary will be used to adjudicate civil cases, which means between people, like disputes about what is whose property, right? And also cases of delicts, which means that somebody breaks the law. So the more important, and it's always so in Liberland, the more important is the civil law. We have something called the primacy of civil law, which means that the law is actually about property. I mean, that's probably evident from what I said. So the most important role of the judiciary, at least in the beginning, is to make sure that contracts are followed. And how do you do that? You have a contract, you register it on a blockchain. The judiciary only works for contracts registered on a blockchain. So please do register your contracts in Liberland on a blockchain. And we have 3 people to every contract, to every basic provision. It can be more, but like the basic, like the elemental definition of a contract is that I sell you something, you buy something from me. There's 2 of us. Who's the third person? That's the judge. And 2 people can decide a contract. This is a Liberland rule. Therefore, if you disagree with the other person on the other side of the contract, which is your buyer, say, you're the seller, then you click on the dispute button and this case starts and the judge gets activated and becomes the second party to either of you. And they decide what the truth is according to Liberland law. So the judge needs to get paid. We talked about court costs. That applies here as well, above all here. So you should collateralize your contract. That means you should bind some currency into it, usually cryptocurrency. And we expect there to be a system of insurance, which will ensure that this is systematically possible, and you just pay every month to an insurance instance, and all your contracts will be collateralized until a certain number or something like that. It depends on the insurance instance. That will be a private business, not a Liberland instance. But we have also delict cases, and that also works on contract, and citizenship is your contract. And that's where the loss of merit and loss of political power comes. You have the power of, or the option, to pay yourself out. I would call this civic repentance. Also, there is this collateralization and insurance, and you collateralize with your politically pooled merits. So of course you don't expect to break the law, but if you do so, then the collateral is your political power in Liberland. You lose that. And if it goes under 5,000, you lose temporarily the ability to vote at all. And insurance may help you here as well. But the bottom line is you are responsible by your political power. And that's by design, because political power comes from responsibility. Lastly, we are supporting others. We are supporting other ministries in their activities, which are international all across the world. People are in Argentina trying to get recognition, and in Africa and so on. And we're drafting the contracts which we propose to the other parties, which also already in many instances got agreed on. We're evaluating contracts between suppliers and the government. We're helping to draft policies and other documents. There is much more to that. We are doing many more activities, but this presentation is coming to a close, and so we should focus on the future. So what can we expect in 2024? It is our aim to ensure that the general election takes place. The general election is that which the articles of the provisional government expect to affect the dissolution of the provisional government. We also would like to adopt the constitution, because that's the necessary prerequisite for the general election. Also, to start the judiciary. Actually, you don't need the constitution for the judiciary. You need the judicial process law, but it's almost finished. We are bent on creating a functioning local community in Liberland, which will be self-sufficient, which will work as a city and where you would like to live. And we have a blockchain, as you know, and we are supporting its growth in any whatsoever aspect to make sure that it goes off, that it becomes one of the big blockchains. That's our ambition, no less than that. Because on this blockchain, the economy of the freest country in the world is going to run, and that's something important. So, thank you very much for listening to me. If you have any questions, you can post them to justice@gov.ll.land. Thank you very much, and have a good day.